There's a kind of silence that screams loudest, not the absence of sound, but the erasure of self. And tonight, in a room full of crystal and power, Elena felt herself vanishing by the minute. Wealthy husband humiliated his wife during their anniversary dinner. Until he saw a new guest arrive, the golden chandelier cast dancing shadows across the private dining room at Le Mistral, Seattle's most exclusive brasserie. 40 guests filled the sophisticated space, their laughter mingling with the gentle clink of crystal flutes and the low hum of quiet conversations. Tonight was meant to be flawless. A celebration of 10 years of marriage between Grant Whitaker and his wife, the woman once hailed as the top luxury home stager in Los Angeles. But Elena Brooks Whitaker felt like an outsider at her own anniversary celebration. She smoothed the fabric of her deep emerald gown, a couture dress Grant had selected because it photographed well, and watched him command the room. At 46, Grant still drew attention effortlessly. His salt and pepper hair was perfectly groomed. His suit, custom Italian, was flawless. His laughter, booming and confident, turned heads from every corner of the room. The rise of his AI tech firm had turned him from the ambitious man she'd once married into someone sharper, colder, calculating. "Elena, darling, you look stunning tonight," said Mrs. Langford, wife of Grant's most influential investor, approaching with that refined smile only wealthy West Coast socialites could perfect. "That dress is absolutely divine." "Thank you," Elena replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She'd learned to speak softly in public. Grant preferred it that way. "You look beautiful, too." But Mrs. Langford had already moved on, pulled by Grant's loud laugh from the bar. Elena stood alone, watching her marriage be celebrated as if she were a ghost haunting her own life. The sommelier moved through the room, filling glasses with Dom Perignon, Grant's choice, of course. Everything was Grant's choice these days. The venue, the guest list, the playlist, even the dessert selection, none of it had involved her input. She was simply the polished accessory, expected to smile and nod at the right moments. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention?" Grant's voice rang out. It cut through the air as he lifted his champagne glass. The room quieted instantly, every eye turning to the head of the table, where he stood tall, self-assured. 10 years ago I married this incredible woman," he began. Beside him, Elena felt her chest tighten as his gaze landed on her. There was something in his eyes tonight, a coolness she'd come to recognize too often lately, usually after too much wine. "Marriage, as we all know, is about evolution." Grant continued, his words slightly slurred from the drinks he'd consumed all evening. "Some of us adapt. We grow, we push limits, we build companies, shape industries, leave a legacy." He gestured broadly at the circle of executives and their elegant spouses. A few chuckled, though the laughter felt uneasy. Then Grant's eyes locked on Elena again, and her stomach turned. Others, well, they settle. Get comfortable, maybe too comfortable. They stop growing, stop dreaming. They become content just existing in the beautiful worlds they've crafted around themselves. The words hit like punches. Elena's hands trembled around her flute, bubbles distorting behind a sudden blur of tears. She fought the urge to vanish. Around her, guests sat awkwardly, faces frozen between second-hand shame and curiosity, watching the wreckage unfold. They couldn't look away. Grant laughed, but it was a cold sound. "Elena does beautiful work staging our homes. She has a gift for making things look perfect, for building these lovely little dream worlds. But sometimes I wonder if she's forgotten there's an entire world beyond throw pillows and accent walls." Mrs. Langford's face had gone pale. Mr. Carlyle, Grant's business partner, stared down at his plate. The words struck Elena like ice water down her spine. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Deliberate, calculated, designed to strip her bare in front of people she barely knew. Her hands were still in her lap, clasped too tightly, nails digging into the soft skin of her palm to keep her from showing any reaction. She couldn't give him that satisfaction. The room had grown so still that Elena could hear her own heartbeat thudding in her ears. "So here's to 10 years, Grant said, lifting his glass higher, his smile sharp as shattered glass. "To the woman who left behind her career in Los Angeles to follow me to Washington. To the wife who's mastered the art of appearing flawless while standing completely still." A slight murmur rippled through the crowd. An uncomfortable shift, the clink of a fork hastily set down. Elena's vision blurred for a moment, heat rising behind her eyes. Not from embarrassment, but from humiliation. The kind that burns slow and deep, because it comes from someone who's supposed to protect you. The silence stretched on, agonizing. No one knew whether they should toast, laugh, or disappear into their chairs. Elena sat motionless, her world crumbling around her while 40 pairs of eyes watched her unravel in real time. Then the restaurant door opened. A tall man stepped into the private dining room, and Elena's breath caught in her throat. He was lean, self-assured, with gentle eyes and graying hair that made him look distinguished rather than old. His suit was simple, perfectly cut, and as his gaze swept the room and settled on her, something shifted in the air. "Sorry I'm late," the newcomer said, his voice warm, even. Traffic from SeaTac was brutal. Grant's champagne flute dropped slightly, his smug expression faltering as he stared at the uninvited guest. Elena felt something stir deep inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. Recognition, possibility, a faint memory of the woman she used to be before she learned to make herself small. The man at the door was Julian Royce, and his arrival changed everything. The silence in the room stretched thin like wire. Grant's glass hovered midair, his practiced grin frozen as he stared at the man who had just entered what was supposed to be his perfectly orchestrated moment of dominance. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't seen Julian in 12 years, but his presence filled the space with the same calm strength she remembered from their days at UCLA. He looked older, yes, more refined, but his eyes, those steady, intelligent eyes, hadn't changed at all. "Julian," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the tense scraping of chairs. He smiled, and for the first time in years, Elena felt seen. "Hi, Elena. Hope I'm not intruding. I was in town for meetings and saw the celebration online." His gaze flicked briefly to Grant, then back to her. "I couldn't miss the chance to congratulate you both on your anniversary." Grant's jaw tightened. The champagne glass finally met the table with a sharp clink. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice edged with territorial alarm. "Have we met?" "Julian Royce," the man said calmly, offering a handshake. "Elena and I were friends in college. I'm a venture capitalist now, San Francisco-based. Actually, I've been following your company's trajectory for a while now." The mention of business seemed to briefly reset Grant's posture, though his gaze remained icy. He shook Julian's hand with the tension of someone asserting dominance. "Grant Whitaker. And how exactly did you hear about this little event?" Mrs. Langford cleared her throat awkwardly. "I may have posted a picture earlier," she admitted, cheeks flushing. "The restaurant is so stunning and you both look so happy." Elena wanted to sink through the floor. That word, happy, rang hollow after the brutal public undressing Grant had just delivered. She could still feel the weight of the guests' stares, heavy with sympathy, curiosity, and discomfort. "Well, this is charming," Grant said, his voice sticky with forced cheer. "An old college buddy drops by. How spontaneous." He turned to the crowd. "Why don't we all sit down and keep the celebration going? I believe I was mid-toast." "Actually," Julian said softly, "I should let you get back to your evening. I just wanted to say hello." He turned to Elena, and in that moment, something unspoken passed between them. A quiet acknowledgement of everything they had just witnessed, and everything they both understood without needing to say it aloud. "It's good to see you, Elena," he said. "You look exactly the way I remember." She remembered. The simple words hit her like a lifeline, tossed to a woman sinking fast. He remembered her, not the faded, cautious version she'd become, but the woman she once was. The designer who had her own opinions, her own ambitions, her own voice. "Wait," Grant's voice sliced through the moment like a knife. "If you're in venture capital, maybe you should stick around. We're always open to smart money." His smile turned sly, almost predatory. "Besides, I'm sure Elena would love to catch up with an old friend. Right, sweetheart?" The endearment felt more like a threat. Elena knew that tone. Grant was maneuvering, and it would not end in her favor. "I really wouldn't want to impose," Julian said cautiously. "Nonsense," Grant replied, gesturing to an empty seat that had been reserved for a no-show associate. "Sit. Stay for the toast?" Elena was just telling everyone how happy she is with her quiet little life here in Seattle. "Weren't you, darling?" Elena's throat felt like sandpaper. Every eye in the room was fixed on her now, waiting for her response to Grant's taunt. The old Elena would have smiled, nodded, played along. But Julian's presence, his reminder of the woman she used to be, made her hesitate. "I never said that," she said softly. The words dropped into the silence like pebbles breaking the surface of still water. Grant's eyebrows rose. His expression sharpened with surprise and the flicker of irritation. "Excuse me?" Elena lifted her chin, just slightly, her voice steadier now. "I said I never claimed to be content with a quiet little life. Those were your words, not mine." The tension in the room coiled tighter. Mrs. Langford reached shakily for her water glass. Mr. Carlyle stared at his napkin as if it might offer an escape route. Julian, however, was watching Elena, with something that might have been pride in his eyes. Grant let out a brittle laugh. Well, look who's found her voice." He leaned back in his chair, eyes glittering with challenge. "Tell us then, sweetheart. What would you call your life, if not quiet and content?" Elena felt the old anxiety rise in her stomach, the instinct to retreat, to apologize. But Julian's eyes stayed on hers, steady, calm, and she remembered what it was like to be seen as someone worth listening to. "I'd call it temporary," she said. The word hovered in the air like a thrown stone, and Grant's face went utterly still. "Temporary" echoed in the private room like a shot across a battlefield. Grant's knuckles turned white as he gripped the edge of the table, his perfectly arranged evening unraveling at the seams. The guests sat frozen, flutes untouched, watching the slow-motion collapse of a marriage that had just cracked in two before their eyes. Elena felt her heart pounding in her chest. In 10 years, she had never once openly defied Grant in public. The old her would have already been backpedaling, smoothing over the moment with apologies and forced laughter. But not tonight, not with Julian there. The way he looked at her, like she was still someone worth knowing, stirred something inside her that she'd thought was long gone. "Temporary," Grant echoed slowly, rolling the word on his tongue like venom. His voice held the chilling calm of a man whose authority had just been questioned. "That's an interesting choice of words. Sweetheart." Mrs. Langford made a quiet, uneasy sound and reached for her purse. "Perhaps we should." "No," Grant cut in sharply, his voice slicing through the suggestion like a blade. "Please, everyone stay. I think we're all very curious to hear what my wife means by temporary." He turned his gaze fully on Elena now, his smile razor sharp. "Are we talking about dinner? This celebration? Or something else entirely?" Elena's mouth went dry. Around the long table, 40 people waited. Watched. Leaned in for her answer. The air felt thick, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap, hidden beneath the white linen napkin, but she kept her chin up. Years of social polish helped her hold her posture, but inside, everything was cracking open. She could feel the press of their curiosity, the tension, like they were spectators at a slow-motion train wreck. But when her eyes found Julian's, it was different. He wasn't looking at her for spectacle. He wasn't leaning forward with glee. He was simply there, steady, anchored, safe. "I meant exactly what I said," Elena replied, her voice steadier now. "This version of my life, this version of me, it's temporary." Grant laughed, short, cruel. "Really? And what version comes next, Elena? The one where you run back to LA and pretend you're still that ambitious little designer? The one where you forget that everything you have, this house, this life, this reputation, came from being my wife?" The words were laced with poison, every syllable intended to remind her of the life he believed he'd built for her. But she heard something else beneath the arrogance. Fear. Fear. Fear that she might remember she'd once built things all on her own. That she might stop needing him. His words hit like slaps across the face, but instead of folding, something clicked inside Elena. A hard, clear stillness, like glass settling. "I haven't forgotten," she said, low and sure. "I've just realized that what I have isn't the same as who I am." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Mrs. Langford sat pale and rigid. Mr. Carlyle studied his hands like they might tell him the future. Even the servers paused, sensing the weight in the room. Julian leaned forward slightly. "Elena designed the most talked-about loft in Venice when she was 26, he said casually, his voice slipping through the tension like a knife through silk. "I still remember the feature in Dwell. Rising star turns shipping warehouse into coastal sanctuary." The photos were unforgettable. Grant's head snapped toward him. That was a long time ago. Talent doesn't expire, Julian replied smoothly. I've been redoing my firm's San Francisco HQ, and honestly, it's been impossible to find someone who gets the balance between function and character. Most designers just want to force their vision onto a space instead of listening to it. And for the first time in years, Elena felt it. Professional pride. She remembered that project. Remembered what it was like to feel excited, alive, in charge. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something long buried beginning to stir. A flicker of that young woman who once spoke with passion in pitch meetings, who sketched blueprints at 2 a.m. because inspiration couldn't wait. Well, Grant's tone now had a mocking edge. I'm sure my wife appreciates the compliment, but she's awfully busy these days, aren't you, darling? All those charity luncheons and Pilates classes, it's practically a full-time job. The jab should have hurt. But it didn't. Not in the way it used to. Now, Grant's words felt small, desperate. Like a man trying to tighten his grip on something already slipping through his fingers. Actually, Elena said, surprising even herself, I've been thinking about taking on some new projects again, small ones, to start. It was a lie, but in the same breath, it felt true. It could be true. The woman who once transformed blank spaces into living art. The woman who built a name on vision and instinct. She wasn't gone. She'd just been sleeping. Grant's jaw tightened. Is that so? And when exactly were you planning to discuss this career comeback with your husband? He leaned forward now, voice sharp. Around the same time you planned to humiliate me in front of 40 people? Elena, she replied, the word leaving her lips before she could stop it. The table erupted in uneasy murmurs. Guests exchanged quick glances, clearly weighing whether they should make polite excuses and escape. The illusion of a perfect anniversary dinner had shattered, and now everyone could see the wreckage beneath. Grant's composure finally cracked. You know what? I think we're done here. He stood abruptly, flinging his napkin onto the table. Everyone, thank you for coming. Elena's not feeling well. Must be the stress of planning such a perfect evening. But as he moved to end the night on his own terms, Elena remained seated. She looked up at him, and for the first time in years, she truly saw him. The charm was a mask, the success, a weapon, the love, a transaction. I feel fine, she said softly. Actually, I feel better than I have in a long time. Grant's jaw clenched. He stared at her like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. And maybe he didn't. Maybe the version of her that had faded into his shadow was finally stepping out into the light. We'll discuss this at home, he said, his voice low and tight with threat. But Elena was already rising from her chair, reaching for her purse. No, she said, her voice ringing through the stunned quiet. I don't think we will. The valet stand outside Le Mistral glowed beneath Seattle's amber streetlights. Elena stood on the sidewalk, her designer heels tapping against the pavement as she paced, breath coming in sharp bursts. The October air carried the faint scent of roasted chestnuts and distant jazz music from a nearby lounge, but she barely noticed. Her world had cracked open in less than an hour. Behind her, through the restaurant's tall glass windows, she could see Grant still working the room. His gestures were animated, his smile wide and fake, no doubt spinning some story about her emotional moment or blaming hormones. The sight made her stomach twist. Elena. She turned. Julian was walking toward her, car keys in hand. Under the soft exterior lighting, she could see the concern written in the lines around his eyes. He'd aged well. There was something solid about him now, a quiet authority shaped by years of hard choices. I called an Uber, she said quickly, her voice trembling as she fumbled with her phone. It should be here in 8 minutes. Cancel it, he said gently but firmly. Let me take you. I can't. Grant will. She stopped herself. 10 years of decisions had all revolved around one question. How would Grant react? What Grant would say? What Grant would allow? Grant will. What? Julian asked softly. Elena turned to glance back at the restaurant, where her husband was now laughing too loudly, probably telling everyone how sorry he was for her little outburst. The woman who had stood up to him 20 minutes ago felt like someone else. Someone braver. Stronger. Someone she didn't quite believe she was yet. He'll be furious, she whispered. Good, Julian said, and the quiet ferocity in his voice made her look up sharply. He should be furious. What he did in there, that was unforgivable. The word struck her like a wave. She'd been gaslit for so long, made to believe that Grant's casual cruelty was harmless, that she was too sensitive, that she didn't get the joke. But now someone else had called it what it really was. Unforgivable, and something cracked open in her chest. "I don't know what's happening to me," she whispered, her voice nearly drowned by the street noise. I don't usually." "You don't usually stand up for yourself," Julian finished gently. "I know, I could see it." She braced herself for judgment, for pity, maybe even disappointment. Instead, all she saw in his face was respect. "The Elena I knew at UCLA would have never let anyone talk to her like that," Julian continued. "She was fierce, stubborn. She once spent 3 days completely redesigning a studio apartment because the professor said her concept lacked emotional authenticity." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "I remember that," she said quietly. "You brought me coffee at 2 in the morning when I was still moving furniture and eating leftover Thai. You were too focused to eat." The memory felt distant, like watching a scene from someone else's life, but it was hers. She had been that woman once, passionate, driven, unwilling to compromise on what she believed in. When had she stopped fighting? "My car's right here," Julian said, gesturing toward a sleek black Tesla parked a few feet away. "Let me take you wherever you want. A hotel, a friend's place, somewhere you'll feel safe." Safe. The word hung between them like something sacred. It hit her like a rush of cold air, sharp and clarifying. Safe, not managed, not tolerated, not a version of security handed down like a leash, but real, quiet, soul-deep safety. When was the last time she'd truly felt that? Not safe in the way Grant's money or status made her feel, but safe to be herself, to speak her mind, to take up space without being punished for it. "I have a friend, Sabrina. She lives over in Queen Anne," she said slowly. "She's been telling me for years," that she faltered. "That you deserve better," Julian finished for her. "That I deserve better," she repeated, letting the words settle on her tongue. They felt foreign, like a language she hadn't spoken in years. But the truth of them, it resonated. Deep in her chest, something began to stir, an ember catching flame. As they walked toward his car, a wave of discomfort crept in. She hadn't brought anything with her. No purse, no overnight bag, not even a change of shoes. The realization struck her with surprising force, how completely she had left her life behind, and how little of it, in that moment, felt worth retrieving. As they walked toward his car, Elena caught her reflection in a shop window. The woman staring back was flawlessly dressed, hair and makeup immaculate, and completely hollow. She looked like a high-end mannequin, beautiful, empty. "Julian," she said as he opened the car door for her. "Why did you really come tonight?" He paused, hand resting on the door handle. "I've seen the anniversary photos over the years. Every year, you looked a little more faded." The honesty knocked the wind out of her. "And tonight, when I saw the restaurant's live post about the romantic dinner," he continued, "something told me you might need a reminder of who you used to be." She slid into the passenger seat. The leather was cool against her skin. Julian walked around and got in beside her. As the Tesla powered on with a soft, almost silent hum, Elena looked back one last time through the restaurant window. Inside, she could still see Grant, animated and smiling, no doubt spinning a narrative about his overly emotional wife. Let him talk, she thought, and she was stunned by the sharp, satisfying heat that followed. Let him explain to 40 of Seattle's elite why his wife walked out on their 10th anniversary dinner. "Her address is 3400 East Highland Drive," she said, voice steadier than it had been all night. As they pulled away from the curb, Elena didn't look back. Not this time. For the first time in a decade, she was more interested in where she was headed than where she'd been. But deep in her chest, a quiet voice stirred. Grant Whitaker didn't give up his possessions easily. And in his mind, that's exactly what she was. Sabrina Chang opened the door before Elena could knock, like she'd been watching from the window. Her curly hair was pulled into a messy bun. She wore paint-splattered overalls over a faded Radiohead tee, a jarring contrast to the polished, airbrush perfection Elena had left behind less than an hour ago. "Ay, Dios mío," Sabrina breathed, taking in the designer dress and the haunted look in her best friend's eyes. What did that cabron do this time? She didn't wait for an answer, just pulled Elena into a hug that smelled like turpentine and lavender soap. It was the first real human contact Elena had felt in months, and she nearly collapsed into it. "I brought her," Julian said quietly from behind them. "I'm Julian Royce. Elena and I knew each other in college." Sabrina's sharp eyes narrowed as she looked him over from behind her friend. As a freelance illustrator who'd built her own business from the ground up, she had a sixth sense for reading people, especially men who might not have her friend's best intentions in mind. "You look like one of the good ones," she said eventually, stepping aside to let them in. "Come on, both of you. Elena looks like she's about to fall over." Sabrina's craftsman bungalow was everything Elena's pristine Queen Anne townhouse wasn't. Messy, artistic, alive. Canvases leaned against walls, books spilled from every shelf. A half-finished mosaic took over the coffee table. It was beautiful chaos, real chaos. The kind that came from a life actually being lived, not perfectly managed. As Elena stepped into the space, something inside her softened. The scent of paint, the warmth of mismatched lighting, the hum of life uncurated. It was like slipping into a forgotten dream. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. Her breath came easier. For the first time all night, she felt a flicker of relief, like she wasn't about to come apart at the seams. But then another wave rolled in, something colder, deeper. Guilt. It threaded through her chest as she looked around at Sabrina's freedom, at the rawness and reality of it. Was she really allowed this? To sit here, to exhale, to let herself be safe while someone else, the man she'd once vowed to love, spiraled without her? "Sit," Sabrina ordered, practically shoving Elena onto the well-worn leather sofa. "I'm making tea, the strong kind, with honey and whiskey." "I should probably go," Julian said, glancing at the door. "You should stay," Sabrina replied, already heading to the kitchen. "At least until we figure out what the hell is going on." She called over her shoulder. "Besides, if Grant shows up here looking for his property, it might be good to have a witness." Elena flinched at the word, but she didn't correct it, because that's exactly what she'd become. A polished possession, like Grant's vintage Bentley or his curated wine collection. "She's protective," Elena murmured to Julian, noticing the concern on his face. "She should be. You look like you've been through a war." Before she could answer, her phone vibrated from inside her bag. Then again, and again. The familiar panic clenched her stomach. 16 missed calls, she said, staring at the screen. All from Grant. The phone buzzed again, and this time she saw the preview of a text. "Where the hell are you? You embarrassed me in front of investors. Get home now." Another, "I know you're with that college friend. Don't make this worse." And another, "Fine. Stay out all night like a child. But we will discuss your behavior when you get home." Each message landed like a slap, sharp, strategic, meant to pull her back into place. Guilt, shame, responsibility for his rage. Her hand trembled as she held the phone. The screen's glow felt like a spotlight on her failures. Failures Grant had written for her, rehearsed for years, until she almost believed they were hers. Her throat tightened, her heart beat faster. The old Elena would already be dialing his number, already apologizing, for leaving, for making a scene, for not being what he needed her to be. "He's texting," she said dully. Julian leaned forward slightly. "What's he saying?" "That I embarrassed him. That I'm acting like a child. That we need to discuss my behavior when I get home." "Your behavior?" Julian repeated, voice tight with restraint. "Not his, when he publicly humiliated you? Not his behavior in that room? Your behavior. For finally standing up for yourself." Sabrina returned from the kitchen with 3 steaming mugs that smelled like chamomile and courage. "Let me guess," she said. "Grant's blowing up your phone, saying this is all your fault." "How did you?" "Because I've watched this happen for 5 years, Sabrina said, settling into the armchair across from them, her tone calm but firm. "Since the day you moved to Seattle. Every time you've come over crying about something he said or did, you ended up apologizing to me for bothering me with your drama. Every time you canceled plans because Grant needed you. Every time you defended the way he talked to you, like an employee, not a wife." The words stung, because they were true. All of it. "I kept hoping you'd see it," Sabrina said gently. "But tonight," so Elena told them. About the dinner, about Grant's speech, about saying the word temporary. Sabrina's expression grew darker with each detail. Julian sat in tight, uneasy silence. "Hijo de puta," Sabrina muttered when Elena finished. "He said that in front of people? In front of business associates? He was drunk, Elena said automatically, then stopped herself. No, that's not an excuse. He was cruel. Yes, Julian said softly. He was, and he's going to get worse now that you've shown him you won't be his perfect silent ornament anymore. The phone buzzed again. This time the message turned her blood to ice. I'm tracking your phone, Elena. I know exactly where you are. This little rebellion ends now. Her hand started shaking. He's tracking me, she said. He knows I'm here. Sabrina was already on her feet. Turn it off, right now. But what if? What if what? Sabrina's voice rose sharply, fierce. What if he needs to control your every move? What if he needs to make sure you're never out of his reach? Elena, she said more quietly but with force. Listen to me. What you described tonight, that's not a marriage. That's emotional abuse. The word hung in the air like a dare. Abuse. Elena had never thought of it that way. Grant had never hit her, never left bruises you could point to. But the cutting remarks, the public shaming, the erosion of her confidence until she forgot how to function without him. What was that, if not abuse? The word sat heavy in her chest, pulsing with realization. It echoed through her ribs, through every memory she'd buried beneath excuses. That night he made her cry before a gala. That weekend he canceled their anniversary trip because she asked a question about money. That morning she stared in the mirror, not recognizing her own reflection. I don't know how to turn off the tracking, she admitted. Julian held out his hand. May I? She nodded and handed him the phone. She watched his fingers move through the settings with precision. There, GPS disabled. An airplane mode, just in case. The silence that followed felt like stepping off a cliff and floating. For the first time in years, Grant couldn't reach her, couldn't monitor her, couldn't demand a reply to his messages. Not right now. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until it escaped in a shudder. The absence of his presence, his digital tether, was almost disorienting. But underneath that was something deeper, a quiet flicker of relief, a first breath after surfacing from deep water. What happens now? She asked. Now, Sabrina said, settling into her chair again. You remember who you were before he convinced you that you were nobody. A car door slammed in the driveway. All three of them froze. Footsteps, heavy, fast, approached the door. Then a loud, angry knock. Elena, Grant's voice boomed through the walls. I know you're in there. We're going home. Now. The knocking intensified, shaking the frame. Grant's voice thundered like a man who'd never once heard the word no. Elena, stop this. You're embarrassing yourself. Even more than you already did tonight. Sabrina rose slowly, her jaw set. There was a ferocity to her now, something wild and maternal. That man, she said, voice low but iron strong, is not coming into my house. Elena felt her chest tighten, panic rising. Maybe I should just go, just to keep it from escalating. We can talk. No. Julian's voice sliced clean through the spiral of doubt. Look at me, Elena. She turned to face him, saw her own fear mirrored in his eyes. That man tracked your phone like you were a fugitive. He humiliated you in a room full of people. And now he's banging on someone else's door at 11 o'clock at night, demanding you come out like a teenager sneaking off to a party. He stepped closer. Does that sound like someone who wants to talk? The pounding stopped. Grant's voice lowered, more dangerous now. I can hear voices. I know you're in there. Come out, or I'm calling the police. Sabrina laughed. Sharp, cold, humorless. Let him. I'd love to explain to Seattle PD why a grown man is harassing his wife at someone else's house in the middle of the night. But Elena had already moved toward the door. 10 years of training tugged her forward. 10 years of smoothing things over. 10 years of believing it was her job to keep him calm, to protect others from his rage. Elena, don't. Julian's hand caught her arm, gentle, steady. You don't owe him access to you. Not right now. Not ever again. She froze, her hand on the doorknob, torn between the gravity of habit and the unfamiliar pull of something stronger, self-preservation. The woman who had walked out of that restaurant, the woman who said the word temporary aloud, she wouldn't open that door. She wouldn't return to the cage just because its keeper was shaking the bars. Elena. Grant's voice shifted again, soft, pleading, sickeningly familiar. The switch from fury to manipulation so rehearsed it made her stomach churn. Baby, I'm sorry about tonight. I had too much wine. You know how I get, but this is ridiculous. We can fix this. We always do. The words that used to feel like magic now rang hollow, rehearsed, calculated. How many times had she fallen for this exact pattern? Grant would push her to the edge, then apologize just enough to pull her back in, just enough to reset the cycle. Again and again. "He's not apologizing for what he did," she said quietly, still facing the door. "He's apologizing for how I reacted to what he did." Sabrina nodded, approving. "Now you're seeing it." The knocking resumed, harder now. "Elena, I'm not leaving without you. You're my wife. You belong at home with me, not hiding in a stranger's house like some teenager." There it was, the claim of ownership masked as concern. "You belong at home with me. Not I miss you. Not I want to talk. But you belong." Like a possession that had wandered off. Elena took her hand off the doorknob and stepped back. "I'm not coming home tonight," she called through the door, her voice clearer than she felt. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Grant's laugh. Cold. Bitter. "Really? And where exactly do you think you're going? To your parents in Ohio? They haven't spoken to you since you chose me over them. Your friends in LA? You ghosted them. You have no money, no job, no life outside of what I gave you." Every sentence was meant to bruise, and they did, because it was true. She had isolated herself, bit by bit, year by year, until his world was the only world she knew. "You need me, Elena," Grant continued, voice quieter now, slick, insidious. "You always have. Remember how we met? You were drowning in loans, living in a studio the size of a closet, working yourself sick. I gave you a life. I gave you everything." Elena closed her eyes, the guilt settling heavy and familiar. It was true. Grant had lifted her out of financial chaos. He'd given her stability, a beautiful home, designer clothes, a name in a city that worshipped status. Was she being ungrateful? Was she blowing up her whole life over one bad night? "Don't listen to him," Sabrina snapped. "That's not love. That's ownership." "I can take care of myself," Elena said loudly through the door. But her voice cracked on the last word. Grant didn't miss it. "With what money?" he fired back. "With what skills? You haven't worked in 8 years. Your portfolio's from 2015. You don't even have a credit card in your name. Everything runs through me." He paused. "You want to leave? Fine, but leave with what you came with. Nothing." The cruelty stole her breath. Not just the threat, but the ease with which he stripped her down, turned her into a liability, a dependent, a zeroed-out balance sheet. Julian stepped closer, his presence steady. "He's wrong," he said quietly. "About the money. About your talent. About everything. But even if he was right, even if you had to start over from zero, wouldn't that still be better than this?" On the other side of the door, Grant's tone shifted again. Desperate now. His last trick. "Elena, I love you. I know I screw up sometimes, but I love you. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't 10 years mean anything?" Love. He was using it like a blade. But love didn't feel like this. Love didn't humiliate you. Love didn't track your phone. Love didn't destroy you piece by piece. "Love doesn't feel like drowning," she whispered. She wasn't even sure anyone had heard her. But Sabrina smiled, fierce, proud. "No, Elena, it doesn't." Outside, a car door slammed. They watched Grant's black Range Rover pull away from the curb. Its headlights swept across the living room one last time before vanishing into the night. Elena dropped onto the couch. Her knees gave out. She had just done something she'd never done before. She had said no to Grant Whitaker. And it had stuck. The silence that followed was a strange mix, freedom and fear, weightlessness and vertigo. She had stepped off the ledge and survived the fall. For a moment she forgot where she was, expecting the familiar sight of the vaulted white ceiling in her Queen Anne townhouse. Instead, she woke on Sabrina's couch, wrapped in a hand-knit blanket that smelled faintly of sandalwood and freedom. Then it all came back. The anniversary dinner, Grant's cruel speech, walking out, the confrontation at the door, and the moment she chose herself over the gilded prison of her marriage. Her phone, still in airplane mode, lit up with 17 missed calls. 43 unread text messages. She didn't need to read them. She already knew. They'd follow Grant's usual cycle: rage, guilt-tripping threats, feigned remorse, and back to rage. The wheel she'd been trapped on for a decade. "You're up," Sabrina said gently, appearing in the doorway with 2 steaming mugs. She'd swapped her paint-streaked overalls for worn jeans and a long cardigan. Her dark curls hung loose around her shoulders. "How do you feel?" Elena thought about that. How did she feel? Terrified, liberated, guilty, exhilarated. Like all her nerves were firing at once, sending her body mixed signals. Like I just jumped off a cliff, she said finally, and I'm not sure if I'm flying or falling. Sabrina nodded as she dropped into the armchair and tucked her legs underneath her. Probably both. That's how real change feels. Through the rain-smeared window, Elena spotted Julian's black Tesla still in the driveway. He stayed, Sabrina said. Guest room pull-out. Said he wanted to make sure Grant didn't come back. Her voice softened. He's a good one, Julian. Respectful. Didn't try to rescue you, just held space. Elena cradled the warm mug in her hands, letting the heat seep into her skin. She'd forgotten what it felt like, to be surrounded by people who didn't want anything from her, who didn't need her to shrink or smile or pretend. I need to go home eventually, she said. Get my stuff, figure out what happens next. Not today, Sabrina said firmly. Today, you rest. Today, you remember who you are when you're not walking on eggshells. But even as she nodded, Elena's mind was already racing, worrying about logistics. Where would she live? What would she drive? How would she pay for anything? Grant controlled everything. The accounts, the credit cards, even the lease on the BMW. I don't have any money, she said quietly. My name's not on anything. Grant always said it was cleaner for taxes if it all ran through the business. Convenient for him, Sabrina muttered, but not legal in Washington. You're entitled to half, everything earned during the marriage. He'll fight me, Elena whispered. Drag it out, make it painful. Probably, Sabrina admitted, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. Elena, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly. Elena nodded. When was the last time, Sabrina asked, you made any decision, without first wondering what Grant would think? The question hit her like a punch to the chest. When was the last time? What to wear, what to eat, where to go, who to talk to, what to say. Every single decision, everyone, filtered through Grant's reaction, his approval or disapproval, his needs, his image, his control. I can't remember, Elena whispered. That's not normal, Mia, Sabrina said softly. That's not marriage. That's prison, with better furniture. Footsteps echoed on the front porch. Julian returning from wherever he'd gone. He walked in carrying a white paper bag from a local bakery and what looked like a laptop case. I brought breakfast, he said, placing the bag on the coffee table, and I took the liberty of doing some research. He opened the laptop, turning the screen so Elena could see. Washington is a community property state, he said. You're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage, including his business. And there are legal protections against financial abuse, which is exactly what Grant threatened last night. I can't afford a lawyer, Elena replied automatically. You don't pay until you win a settlement, Julian said, calm and matter-of-fact. Most divorce attorneys working high-asset cases operate on contingency. He clicked open another tab. I also found 3 nonprofits in Seattle that provide legal aid to women leaving financially abusive relationships. And there's one specifically focused on emotional and economic abuse survivors. The word shelter made her stomach twist. That wasn't her, was it? She'd lived in a luxury townhouse, worn Chanel, hosted fundraisers. She didn't belong in the same category as women who had to flee with nothing but a duffel bag. But her thoughts betrayed her. For a moment, she pictured herself with just one suitcase, one bag, one quiet exit. What would she take? What would she leave behind? And in that image, she saw something terrifying. She wouldn't miss any of it. Not the clothes, the furniture, the lifestyle, just the parts of herself she'd lost along the way. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice whispered that maybe she did belong. Not because of what she had lost, but because of what she had endured. Abuse didn't always leave bruises. Sometimes it left emptiness and silence, and the kind of exhaustion that no amount of money could fix. I know what you're thinking, Sabrina said, watching her closely. You think you don't deserve help because your life looked perfect on the outside. But abuse doesn't care about your zip code, Elena. Money can't buy your voice back. Julian was typing again. There's an attorney named Juniper Walsh. She specializes in high-net-worth divorce cases with financial coercion. She has a consultation open this afternoon, if you're ready. This afternoon? Panic crept in. Everything was happening too fast, too big, too real. I can't, Elena said, voice tightening. I need time. Time, Julian said gently. is exactly what Grant's counting on. He closed the laptop slowly. The longer you wait, the more ground he gains. He'll hide assets. He'll reframe the story. He'll claim you abandoned the marriage and try to force your hand. Elena's eyes fell to the floor, but her mind raced backward. How many times had she told herself she needed more time, more space, just a little longer to find the right moment? And every time, that moment never came, because Grant made sure it wouldn't. The air seemed heavier now. Each word Julian spoke felt like a spotlight exposing the things she'd wanted to pretend weren't happening, things Grant had already begun doing. The lies, the manipulation, the quiet, calculated erasure. As if summoned by his words, her phone buzzed. Grant. A photo from their honeymoon in Venice lit the screen. Elena laughing, head thrown back, Grant looking smug and satisfied beside her. She'd once loved that photo. Now it looked like Exhibit A. "Don't answer," Sabrina said firmly. But as Elena stared at the image, something clicked inside her. She wasn't scared, not like before. She didn't feel that immediate, uncontrollable need to respond, to diffuse his mood, to keep the peace. What she felt was pity. Pity for a man so obsessed with control, he couldn't see the cracks forming beneath his carefully curated life. Pity for the emptiness he tried to fill with domination. And most of all, pity for how small he seemed now that she had finally stepped outside his shadow. He was scrambling, because for the first time in 10 years, she wasn't where he expected her to be, doing what he expected her to do. And that meant she had more power than she realized. The call went to voicemail. Seconds later, a text appeared. "I'm filing a missing person report. You're clearly having some kind of breakdown, and these people are taking advantage of you. Come home and we'll get you the help you need." Elena read the message aloud. Julian's jaw tightened. Classic abuser tactic. Paint you as unstable. Accuse your friends of manipulation. Play the worried husband trying to rescue his poor irrational wife. "He's getting desperate," Sabrina said, voice low and serious. "And that means he's getting dangerous. You need legal protection, and you need it fast." Today, Elena looked around the room, at Sabrina's fierce protective stance, at Julian's laptop, filled with links and case law, at the untouched coffee growing cold in her hands, at the soft rhythm of Seattle rain painting the windows. This wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was the first morning in years that belonged entirely to her. "Okay," she said softly. "Call the lawyer." And for the first time since the anniversary dinner, she wasn't reacting to Grant's next move, she was making her own. But even as Julian pulled out his phone and dialed, a voice deep in her gut whispered a warning. Grant Whitaker had built an empire by never accepting no as an answer, and he wasn't about to start now. Still, for once, she wasn't backing down. She wasn't asking for permission or weighing the potential consequences of upsetting him. This wasn't about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming the right to her own future. The law office of Juniper Walsh sat on the third floor of a converted Victorian on Capitol Hill. The exposed brick walls were lined with thick legal volumes and framed degrees. Everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and quiet authority. Elena sat across from the attorney, still in the wrinkled navy dress she'd worn to last night's anniversary dinner. Mascara stained the collar. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Juniper Walsh was nothing like what she'd imagined. Early 40s, sharp silver streaks pulled into a low bun, a tailored black suit, and clear, kind eyes that had seen things that didn't need bruises to be real. She listened without interruption as Elena told her everything. Occasionally, she jotted something down on a yellow legal pad. The phone tracking, the financial restriction, the public shaming. Juniper said when Elena finished, "These fall under coercive control, and in Washington, that matters. We can use that pattern to petition for a larger portion of marital assets and long-term support." "But I left," Elena said, guilt already threading through her chest. "Doesn't that make it abandonment?" "You left an abusive environment. That's called self-preservation, not abandonment." Juniper's tone was firm, steady. "Now I need to ask some difficult questions. Has Grant ever threatened you physically? Ever raised a hand in anger?" Elena shook her head. "No, he's too smart for that. Emotional abuse is still abuse, sometimes more damaging, because it leaves no bruises people can see." Juniper made another note. "And financial control? You mentioned he manages everything?" Everything goes through his company, Elena said. He said it was easier for taxes. But as the words left her mouth, she heard them for what they were. Excuses. Excuses she had accepted for years. Excuses that had chipped away at her sense of independence until she couldn't recognize her own voice anymore. At first, it was convenience, then efficiency. Eventually, it became total control, questioning her purchases, asking why she needed a new dress, making her justify dinner with an old friend. When's the last time you had a bank account or credit card in your own name? 2018, Elena said. He said we'd get better interest rates if we consolidated. Juniper scribbled again. And your career? I stopped working in 2017. His business was scaling, and he needed me to entertain clients. Said my freelance work was a rounding error compared to what he could earn with me hosting fundraisers and events. Each memory, once brushed aside as practicality, now felt like evidence in a case she'd tried not to build. A slow unraveling of her autonomy, disguised as partnership. Each answer stung, but Juniper never flinched. Never judged. And Elena realized this woman had heard stories like hers before. Too many of them. I need to ask one more thing, Juniper said. Do you have evidence? Messages, emails, recordings, any witnesses? Elena glanced at her phone. Still on the desk. Still buzzing with more texts from Grant. His messages from last night were there. And there were 40 people at that restaurant who had watched him take her apart, piece by piece. That's something, Juniper said. What about financial records? Statements, returns, company documents? I used to help with the books when his company was smaller, Elena said slowly. I might still have some spreadsheets or backups on my laptop at home. She hesitated. I built the original website, wrote all the copy, designed the first 5 years of marketing content. That matters, Juniper said firmly. You contributed value to that business, even if you were never on payroll. She leaned in. Elena, I want you to hear me. Washington is a community property state, Juniper said, voice calm but firm. That means everything acquired during your marriage belongs equally to both of you. Grant's business, the townhouse, investments, everything. He doesn't get to cut you off just because you finally found the courage to stand up to him. For the first time since walking into the office, Elena felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. Really? Really, Juniper said. But Grant's gonna fight dirty. Men like him always do. He'll say you're unstable, ungrateful, manipulative. He'll claim you abandoned the marriage, that you're having an affair, that you're mentally unfit. Are you prepared for that? The words hit like a physical punch. Elena thought of Grant's message about filing a missing person report, the text accusing her of having a breakdown. He was already laying the foundation, crafting a narrative where she was the villain and he the loyal, patient husband. I don't know, she admitted. Then we have to be smarter, faster. Juniper slid a checklist across the desk. First, we file for temporary orders, spousal support, exclusive use of the home, or funding for alternative housing. And most importantly, she paused, a restraining order if there's any escalation. A restraining order? Elena asked, startled. But he hasn't. He tracked your phone, Juniper cut in. He showed up at your friend's house and pounded on the door at night. That's stalking. Just because he's your husband doesn't give him the right to hunt you down. Elena felt her throat tighten, the word stalking crashing over her like cold water. It was a word she'd associated with strangers, not husbands, not the man she'd once vowed to love. But now it echoed with terrifying clarity. He'd always known where she was, what she was doing, who she was with. She used to think it was protection, even romance. Now she knew it was surveillance. What happens next? She asked. We serve him within 48 hours. Surprise is critical. We don't want him hiding funds or trying to reframe this to his advantage. Juniper's tone grew heavier. I won't lie to you. Grant has resources, lawyers, PR connections, but you have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth. As if summoned by their conversation, Elena's phone buzzed again. She looked down and felt her blood freeze. I know you're meeting with lawyers. This is a mistake, Elena. I've given you everything, and this is how you repay me? Fine. If you want to play hardball, I can play hardball too. Juniper leaned over to read the message and immediately picked up her landline. I'm calling in a favor for an emergency restraining order. This qualifies as a threat. But he didn't say anything specific, Elena protested weakly. He's monitoring your movements, he's making veiled threats. That's enough. Juniper was already speaking rapidly into the phone. Judge Collier owes me a favor, and she doesn't tolerate domestic intimidation. As Juniper rattled off legal terms and case numbers, another text popped up on Elena's screen. You think you can walk away from 10 years? From everything I gave you? You're nothing without me, Elena. Nothing. And I'm gonna prove it. There it was. The mask slipping. The charming, powerful executive, gone. What remained was the control-fueled monster he'd always been behind closed doors. The message cut deeper than any insult, not because she believed it, but because she recognized the truth hiding behind the fury. He was afraid. He was losing control. And men like Grant didn't know how to lose quietly. For the first time, Elena saw him clearly. Emergency hearing is set for tomorrow morning, Juniper said, hanging up. Save all those texts, everyone. He's building our case for us. Elena stared down at her phone, at the increasingly desperate, erratic messages. And she realized something. Grant's greatest strength, his need to control every single narrative, was about to become his greatest liability. Because he couldn't help himself, he was going to keep threatening, keep texting, keep talking. And this time, she was going to let him. Elena sat stiffly on a wooden bench outside Judge Collier's courtroom, her hands trembling as she clutched a folder filled with screenshots of Grant's threatening messages. She wore clothes borrowed from Sabrina, a navy blazer and simple black dress that fit well enough but felt more like armor than fashion. Each fiber of her outfit seemed woven with resolve. These weren't clothes to impress, this was her battle gear. Her heart raced, adrenaline priming her for what lay ahead, but beneath it all, a quiet determination had taken root. Still, even now, part of her questioned if she belonged in this hallway. What if the judge didn't believe her? What if she stumbled? What if Grant's narrative drowned hers? Years of being second-guessed had trained her well, not just to doubt Grant, but to doubt herself. Beside her, Juniper Walsh calmly reviewed their courtroom strategy for the final time. Remember, only speak when asked a direct question. Answer truthfully, briefly. Don't let him bait you into reacting emotionally. Elena nodded, her stomach tight. Grant's gonna try to make you look unstable, vindictive, or manipulative, Juniper continued. Our job is to let the facts speak for themselves. Through the tall courthouse windows, Elena watched as Grant arrived flanked by 3 attorneys in $1,000 suits. Even from a distance, the performance was clear. His expression perfectly arranged into worried concern, his body language that of a devoted husband struggling to cope with his wife's mental spiral. He was always good at optics. He brought the A-team, Juniper noted dryly, Harrison, Locke, and Pritchard, specialists in high-asset divorces and character destruction. Elena's throat tightened. What if they're better than us? They're not, Juniper said. Her smile was sharp. They're just louder, and we have something they don't. A client who's telling the truth. Elena looked down at her trembling hands. The folder she held wasn't just evidence, it was her life, dissected into digital threats and cold messages. There was no room for error. No second take. She had to get it right the first time. When their case was called, Elena followed Juniper into the courtroom, her legs barely holding her weight. Judge Collier was a steely-eyed woman in her early 60s, known for her no-nonsense demeanor and surgical focus on facts over theatrics. Grant sat across the aisle at the respondent's table, wearing an expertly tailored suit and a faint, pained smile that might have fooled anyone who hadn't lived through his private cruelty. This is an emergency hearing for a temporary restraining order, Judge Collier announced. Miss Walsh, you may proceed. Juniper rose smoothly. Your Honor, my client, Elena Whitaker, is seeking legal protection from her husband's escalating pattern of harassment, financial coercion, and emotional abuse. She presented the evidence clearly, the GPS phone tracking, the veiled threats, the texts, the humiliating toast at their anniversary dinner. Elena watched as Grant's lead attorney, Douglas Harrison, scribbled notes and leaned in to whisper in Grant's ear. Then Harrison stood. Your Honor, Mr. Whitaker is deeply concerned by his wife's sudden, erratic behavior. For 10 years, he's provided Mrs. Whitaker with stability, comfort, and unwavering love. Her recent accusations appear to be the product of a psychological episode, possibly influenced by new individuals in her life with questionable intentions. The words landed like punches, exactly as Grant had intended. Unstable, ungrateful, manipulated. But Elena no longer flinched. Instead, each accusation chewed the air, and in that moment she felt her own voice swell. Quiet, undeniable, true. Clarity. "Mrs. Whitaker," Judge Collier said, turning to her, "I'd like to hear from you directly. Why are you seeking this restraining order?" Elena stood, heart pounding. This was it, her moment. "Your Honor," she began, voice low but steady, "for 10 years, I believed that loving someone meant becoming small enough to fit into the version of me he wanted. I thought gratitude meant tolerating humiliation. I convinced myself that safety meant surrender." She paused, feeling every eye in the room settle on her. Not with pity, not with judgment, but with attention. Attention she'd withheld from herself for too long. She exhaled slowly, words coming faster now, sharper. "But love doesn't track your phone to monitor your movements. Love doesn't mock you in front of guests to assert power. Love doesn't threaten to destroy you financially for walking away. If you dare to have your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own voice." Elena could see Grant's mask begin to crack. His jaw clenched as he fought to maintain his polished image. "Mr. Whitaker may have given me financial security," Elena said clearly, "but he took something more valuable in return, my sense of self. And when I finally found the courage to remember who I was before I learned to disappear, he couldn't tolerate it." Judge Collier leaned forward. "What specific behavior are you afraid of, Mrs. Whitaker?" "He tracked my phone when I chose not to come home. He showed up at my friend's house making demands. His text messages have become increasingly threatening as his control has unraveled." Elena's voice was calm, resolute. "But what I fear most is that he'll use his money, his influence, and his charm to convince people that my need for independence is actually a mental breakdown." "Objection," Harrison snapped. "Your Honor, Mrs. Whitaker is clearly being coached." "Actually," Judge Collier interrupted, turning her attention to Grant, "I'd like to hear from Mr. Whitaker himself. Sir, what is your response to these allegations?" Grant stood slowly, composed as ever. "Your Honor, I love my wife. Everything I've done has been to protect and provide for her. If she felt controlled, that was never my intention. I was trying to be a good husband." "Mr. Whitaker," the judge cut in, her tone sharper, "did you or did you not track your wife's phone after she chose not to return home?" "I was worried about her safety." "Yes or no? Did you track her phone?" There was the slightest pause. "I may have checked her location, but only because." "And did you show up at someone else's home and demand she come with you?" "I went to bring my wife home. She was clearly in the middle of some emotional episode." "Mr. Whitaker," Judge Collier said, her voice now steely, "you are not answering my questions. You are justifying behavior that you haven't yet acknowledged." The courtroom went silent. Grant's lawyer subtly nudged his elbow, but he couldn't stop. His need to control the narrative overrode his instincts. "My wife has no income, no life outside of what I've provided. She's been manipulated by people who want to destroy our marriage. This entire proceeding is enough." Judge Collier's voice was a verbal gavel. "Mr. Whitaker, you've just demonstrated precisely the behavior your wife described. You've minimized her agency, dismissed her concerns, and positioned yourself as the sole source of reason and truth in your marriage." Elena watched Grant's face cycle from indignation to confusion to cold, calculated rage. "Restraining order granted," Judge Collier declared. "Mr. Whitaker, you are prohibited from contacting, following, or approaching Mrs. Whitaker. Violation will result in immediate arrest." The gavel struck, and Elena felt it, a real, tangible weightlifting. Legal protection, recognition, validation. But when her eyes met Grant's, she saw what had always been lurking beneath. Not a disappointed husband, but a man who had just lost control of his most prized possession. The battle wasn't over. 6 months later, Elena stood in the doorway of her new studio apartment in Capitol Hill, watching the morning sunlight pour through the large windows she'd chosen herself. The space was small, just under 800 square feet, but every inch of it was hers. No marble countertops, no walk-in closets, just exposed brick, wooden floors, and a kind of honest, imperfect beauty that couldn't be bought, only created. The divorce had been brutal. Just as Laurel had predicted, Grant fought every asset division, every spousal support term, every proposal for a fair settlement. He hired investigators to follow Elena, spread lies about her mental state through their old Seattle social circle, and even tried to sue her for allegedly stealing proprietary company data, when all she had done was retrieve her own design files. But he had underestimated two things: Washington's community property laws and Elena's newfound refusal to be bullied. The final judgment awarded her half of everything, including a 40% stake in Grant's precious cybersecurity firm. A valuation so steep, his lawyer had physically winced when the judge read it out loud. More than that, it gave Elena something she hadn't believed she'd ever reclaim: the financial base to rebuild her life on her own terms. Her phone buzzed with a message from Catalina. "Ready for the big reveal? I'm bringing Prosecco and dumplings." Elena smiled as she looked around the apartment that was now both her home and her design studio. After months in Catalina's guest room, after depositions, court appearances, and the painstaking work of disentangling her life from Grant's, she was ready to begin again. The space reflected everything she'd come to understand about herself in the past 6 months. Gone were the cold perfection and minimalist grays Grant had insisted on. In their place were clay-red walls, reclaimed mid-century furniture, flea market finds, and artwork from local painters that moved her, not because of price tags, but because of meaning. A knock at the door broke her train of thought. She opened it to find Silas standing there with a bouquet of bright yellow sunflowers and the same expression she'd come to trust: warm, steady, and entirely without pretense. "Congratulations on your grand opening," he said, as he stepped inside. "This place is amazing, Elena. It's so you." That last word still caught her off guard sometimes. For years, she had been an accessory to someone else's story, a reflection of Grant's taste, a vessel for his image. Relearning who she was, when no one was watching, when no one was demanding she shrink herself, had been both terrifying and freeing. "That's the client area," she said, gesturing to a sunlit nook filled with patterned armchairs. "And over here's where I'll work. Plans, samples, mood boards." "Speaking of clients," Silas said, adopting a mock-casual tone, "I might know someone looking to renovate an office in San Francisco. Needs a designer who understands balance between modern function and emotional warmth." Elena laughed, a deep, unguarded sound that felt brand new. "Sounds like a picky client." "He is," Silas replied, grinning, "but he's heard you might be worth it." Unlike Grant, Silas had never tried to fix her or lead her life for her. He'd simply stood by, offered quiet encouragement, and let her steer. "I might be interested," she said lightly, "but I've become a bit selective." Before he could respond, Catalina swept into the apartment with a clatter of shopping bags and a pop of cork. "Mi amor, this space," she shouted, arms wide. "It's like you distilled your soul into furniture." Behind her trailed 3 other women from Elena's support group, all survivors of financial manipulation, all rebuilding, all thriving. As they explored the space, commenting on decor and asking about launch plans, Elena caught her reflection in the mirror by the door. The woman looking back was still her, but not the version who braced for judgment. This one stood taller, eyes clear, shoulders relaxed, mouth ready to smile without permission. "I have some news," she said as the others settled around her with plates and glasses. "Architectural Digest called me yesterday. They wanted to feature the studio in their Rising West series, profiles of designers reclaiming their careers after life-changing setbacks." The room erupted in cheers and clinking glasses, but Elena found herself thinking about the timing's strange irony. That morning, she'd received an email from someone in their old Seattle circle. Dana Whitmore, of all people, had reached out to check in and casually mentioned that Grant had been spotted at a fundraiser with someone new, young, vibrant, and visibly eager to please. The kind of woman Elena had once been. Polished, agreeable, careful not to challenge too much, ask too much, want too much. The memory curled cold in her chest. She remembered how she used to stand beside Grant at similar events, rehearsing every laugh, calculating every compliment, measuring every word to keep the evening pleasant. It hadn't been presence. It had been performance. The old Elena might have felt jealous, or vindicated, or even concerned for the young woman who didn't yet realize what she was stepping into. But this Elena, this version of her, felt only a distant, detached pity. For Grant, who was already repeating his old patterns, and for the woman who would in time learn what Elena had been forced to learn. Some people don't change. They just find new people to control. Earth to Elena. Catalina called, waving a hand in front of her. Where'd you go? Just thinking how different everything feels now, she replied honestly. Different good or different terrifying? Asked Luna, one of the women from her support group. Elena considered the question. Different, real, she said finally. For the first time in a decade, I'm living my own life. Not someone else's version of it. The truth of that landed in her chest like a full breath of clean air. She could feel it settle inside her, rooted and warm. And yet, somewhere in that warmth, a tiny pulse of fear still flickered. Not fear of Grant, but fear of herself, of trusting her instincts after years of silencing them. Real was beautiful, but real was also raw, and raw meant vulnerable. As the day wound down and the women trickled out, Silas stayed behind, helping her tidy up leftover champagne flutes and paper plates. Can I ask you something? He said as they stood in her tiny kitchen, rinsing dishes. Of course. Are you happy? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Was she happy? She was still uncertain about the future, still healing from the trauma of a decade-long performance, still trying to build a new version of her career from the ground up. Her apartment was smaller, her savings slimmer, her life less predictable. But her laughter no longer caught in her throat. Her thoughts no longer asked for permission. Her reflection no longer frightened her. She could speak without filtering, choose without fear, breathe without permission. She could sleep without wondering whether she'd wake to kindness or cruelty. And in all that uncertain space, something precious had bloomed. Peace. Not perfection, not closure, but peace. Yes, she said, surprised by the clarity in her own voice. I'm happy. Later, after Silas left with a smile and a promise to call about that picky San Francisco client, Elena sat in her living room as the orange sun dipped below the Austin skyline. Her laptop was open, glowing softly. The homepage of her new website filled the screen. Elena Whitaker, Interior Design. No husband's name, no titles, just hers. Her phone remained quiet. No location pings, no text alerts, no demands for an explanation. The silence used to feel like loneliness. Now it felt like freedom, the kind that wasn't loud or showy but steady, like the hum of a city at dusk, the kind of freedom that let her be enough, as she was. She began typing her reply to the Architectural Digest editor. As she wrote, about rising from codependence to creativity, from being controlled to finally creating, she understood something. Her story had never really been about Grant. It was always about her. It was about remembering she had always been whole. She'd just forgotten how to see it. Outside her window, Austin buzzed with the morning pulse of dreamers and doers, chasing purpose and presence. And for the first time in a decade, Elena Whitaker was one of them. 2 years later, golden light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena's new design studio in the heart of Austin's Arts District. The space, 3 times the size of her original studio, featured exposed beams, polished concrete floors, and a wall lined with awards chronicling her remarkable comeback. The latest addition? A framed Texas Monthly cover featuring Elena as one of Austin's most inspiring entrepreneurs. But it wasn't the recognition that made her smile as she prepared for her morning consultation. It was the sound of authentic laughter coming from the conference room, where her newest hire, Becca, a talented young designer who reminded Elena of herself at 25, was walking a couple through their mood board for a first home renovation. Every space has a story, Becca was saying, repeating the very mantra that had become the heartbeat of Whitaker Studio. Our job isn't to impose our vision, it's to help you discover yours. Elena paused, letting those words settle in her chest. They weren't just branding anymore. They were a belief system. A reclamation of what had once been taken from her, her voice, her perspective, her ability to shape beauty from brokenness. The words held weight. Becca wasn't just an employee, she was a scholarship recipient from the Whitaker Foundation, a nonprofit Elena had quietly established 6 months ago to support women exiting financially abusive relationships. It was funded entirely from Elena's divorce settlement, a poetic repurposing of funds once used to control her, now empowering others to reclaim themselves. Her phone buzzed. A message from Silas lit up the screen. Flight delayed, but I'll be there for dinner. Can't wait to see the Morrison Ring concepts. Elena smiled, her thoughts momentarily drifting to how easily their bond had grown, from friendship to creative collaboration to a slow, steady love built on mutual respect. There had been no grand declarations, no rescues, no dependencies, just two whole people choosing each other, again and again. It felt like breath, not burden. A connection that didn't demand shrinking or silence. She was now designing spaces for couples who truly loved one another, not just performed happiness. Perhaps that's why she was so good at her job. She knew the difference. A soft knock pulled her back. Catalina stepped in, 2 coffees in hand and a triumphant glint in her eyes. "Guess what just hit the news?" she said, setting down the cups and pulling out her phone. "Remember that young woman Grant was seeing, the one Dana Whitmore mentioned?" Elena nodded slowly. She rarely thought about Grant anymore, save for quarterly financial statements and court-mandated updates. The restraining order had become permanent. His presence in her life had become nothing more than an old watermark on a page that had long been rewritten. "She filed for a restraining order yesterday," Catalina said, tone turning grim. "Says he was tracking her phone, controlling her money, isolating her socially. Sound familiar?" Elena felt that familiar ache, but it wasn't for Grant. It was for the young woman who was just beginning to recognize the prison she was in. "She have good lawyers?" "She does." Catalina's smile widened. "Juniper Walsh is representing her." That made Elena's heart lift. Juniper had become more than her attorney. She was a friend, a mentor, and a fierce advocate in helping others identify patterns of emotional abuse. There was something beautifully full circle about her now leading another woman away from Grant's grasp. "The article says this is his second domestic case in 2 years," Catalina added. "His partners are reassessing their business ties." "Good," Elena said, not with spite but with calm finality. Actions have consequences, even for men who believe their wealth and charisma shield them from accountability. The truth? Elena rarely thought about Grant anymore. He was a footnote, a past chapter in a book that had only just begun to unfold. Her phone chimed again, a calendar reminder. 3 p.m., Architectural Digest photo shoot, 2-year retrospective. They were doing a follow-up article, part of a series spotlighting women who had turned personal devastation into professional transformation. The photographer wanted to catch her in her natural space, surrounded by color swatches, sketches, and creative momentum. This time, she didn't feel like an imposter in her own narrative. She was no longer auditioning for joy, she was living it. And Elena was ready. Her natural element wasn't really about the work, impressive as it had become. It was about the freedom to speak her mind in meetings, to trust her instincts without overthinking, to take up space unapologetically. It was about building something completely her own and watching it thrive. The conference room burst into cheerful excitement as Becca's clients approved their design concept. Through the glass partition, Elena watched them hugging, their faces glowing with joy at the prospect of making their first true home. That's what she had built. Not just a successful business or a beautiful life, but a foundation strong enough to hold the dreams of others. Every woman who found her voice through the Whitaker Foundation. Every couple who learned to communicate honestly instead of mimicking perfection. Every young designer like Becca who realized talent and integrity could walk hand in hand. They were all part of the structure Elena had built out of the wreckage of her past. Her laptop pinged with a new message. A consultation request from a tech entrepreneur in San Francisco who had seen her work featured in Dwell. He said he was seeking a designer who prioritized authenticity and connection over flashy aesthetics. Elena laughed. The language was unmistakably Silas's, his polite formality barely disguising his continued campaign to get her to redesign his home office. An obviously personal request masquerading as professional. She typed back, "Mr. Whitmore, I'd be happy to discuss your project. However, I should note I'm currently booked 6 months out and I charge premium rates for clients who think they're being subtle while being completely transparent." The reply came within minutes. "Miss Whitaker, I'm willing to meet your rates and timeline. This client also offers excellent dinner conversation and a deep admiration for strong, independent women who build their own empires." She was still grinning when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but it was a local area code. "Whitaker Design. This is Elena." The voice on the other end was young, timid, cautious. "Hi, my name is Ashley Chen. I got your number from a lawyer, Juniper Walsh. She said you might be able to help me." Elena felt her heart tighten. She recognized that tone, that careful phrasing shaped by years of fear. "What can I do for you, Ashley?" "I'm trying to start over after a really hard situation. I don't have much, just a small apartment, but I want it to feel like mine." Miss Walsh said, "You have a foundation for women like me." Elena looked around her studio. The awards, the team, the buzz of purposeful energy. All of it had grown from one decision, the moment she'd said temporary and meant it. "Ashley," she said, her voice steady with warmth and purpose, "let's talk about how we can build you a foundation no one can shake." As she reached for her calendar to book the consultation, Elena realized her story was never just about surviving Grant's abuse or recovering from it. It was about learning the life she thought was over was actually just beginning. So that's the end of the story. Or maybe just the beginning. Hey, our wonderful friends, are you still here with us? If you're still watching at this moment, then something in Elena's journey has touched your heart in a way that matters. And now let's take a moment, you and me, to reflect from a deeper place. This wasn't just a story about a woman escaping a toxic relationship. It was about remembering who you are, reclaiming your voice, and rebuilding, brick by brick, the life you thought you had lost. It's about the quiet power of choosing yourself, even when your whole world is telling you not to. As the Stoic philosopher Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And Elena, she chose mastery, not over others, but over her own life, her own choices, her own future. In life, many of us are taught to be quiet, agreeable, or small for the sake of keeping peace. But healing doesn't come from pretending. Healing begins when you stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you and start listening to your own voice again. So if you've ever felt like you're living someone else's version of your life, this story is your sign. Your past does not define you. You are not the brokenness someone left behind. You are the architect of your next chapter. If this story stirred something in you, if it made you pause, breathe, or even cry a little, please like this video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to our channel. You never know who's waiting for a reminder that they, too, are worth saving. And remember, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. You're not alone. We see you, and we believe in your comeback.